Hello, my name is Isabella Campbell, and we'll be talking about physician-assisted suicide. Our resolve is that the terminally ill patients have the right to physician-assisted suicide. So basically what physician-assisted suicide is that it's in terminally ill patients that are competent and not clinically depressed, requesting for a prescription from his or her doctor that will end his life. Stephen Hawking, who was diagnosed with Lou Gehrig's disease, expressed that, "I think those who have a terminal illness and are in great pain should have the right to choose to end their lives, and those that help them should be free from prosecution." Just think about those words and let them resonate of what he was feeling. Our significance claim is that patients are experiencing too great of pain. To go off our significance claim that patients experience too great of pain, Ira Byock, Director of Palliative Medicine at Dartmouth-Hitchcock Medical Center, and author of The Best Care Possible, states that when patients have a terminal illness, at some point more disease treatment does not equal better care. Patients are left to suffer throughout their terminal disease without a sufficient course of treatment, rather than take control of their own life and choose death versus living with a terminal disease that has no course of treatment. In a Dartmouth study of elderly cancer patients nearing death, the study found that 9% had a breathing tube or other life-prolonging procedure in the last month. And at most academic medical centers, more than 40% of the patients saw 10 or more doctors in the last 6 months of their lives. Their lives are determined on how much pain they'll experience and are hooked to machines that help them breathe. It is not an adequate lifestyle to be living. Also, Richard Dybert, a medical doctor and theologian, stated that unless you die suddenly, which only happens 10% of the time, you and I will have the opportunity to choose a long and slow and twisting death. Rather than having this slow, painful, and twisting death, terminal illness patients can choose physician-assisted suicide. Dr. Marcia Angell, a former editor of the New England Journal of Medicine, expressed that the pain her father experienced from prostate cancer drove her father to kill himself with a pistol. Patients shouldn't have to experience such a traumatic death that leaves their loved ones traumatized as well, but should die in peace and not gruesomely. In a study done by the New England Journal of Medicine that rated the caregivers who supported physician-assisted suicide on patients with ALS, 62% said that they would support the patient's decision in physician-assisted suicide. Caregivers have to see all the pain patients go through, and even they would totally go for physician-assisted suicide. If it is something they wish for, then they would stand by their wishes. Our significance claim is that legalizing physician-assisted suicide would benefit not only the patients, but society as well. The most obvious benefit of physician-assisted suicide for the patient would be complete and total control over how they choose to die and where, and it would relieve them of their pain and suffering. As it is, a Gallup survey found that 70% of Americans are in favor of allowing doctors to end a patient's life when the words are described as "end the patient's life by some painless means." The same survey by Gallup also found that when it is worded to assist the patient to commit suicide, 51% were for it as well. Although the number is a lot smaller, it shows that the majority of Americans are still for physician-assisted suicide, no matter how it's worded. By allowing physician-assisted suicide, you are giving the American people what the majority of us want. Physician-assisted suicide would also benefit society economically as well, because Time magazine stated that 1 out of every 4 Medicare dollars, over $125 billion, is spent on care near the end of life, and physician-assisted suicide would eliminate these high care costs completely, or the majority of it. Also, the financial burden patients put their families through is staggering, and eliminating the costs and giving the patient their wishes as well would not only benefit them, but also their families. Not only is the amount of money we spend on dying patients high, but this is money that can be spent on patients that will actually get better and not just eventually die due to their terminal disease. Dr. Marcia Angell, who I quoted earlier, also stated that physician-assisted suicide isn't a choice between life and death, but a choice of the exact timing and the manner of death. because these patients are dying. That's just the truth of it. Rather than putting pressure on the patients would benefit by choosing physician-assisted suicide as their way of dying because they already are. The solvency claim is that there is previous experience with physician-assisted suicide. 5 states in the U.S., including Oregon, Washington, Vermont, Montana, and a county in New Mexico, all allow either the right of the patients to acquire prescriptions from their physicians for lethal doses, or that a court's ruling decides their fate. Based on Time magazine, since 1998, 1,173 people have had death with dignity prescriptions written. Nearly 2/3 of patients, 752 people, have died from taking those prescriptions, and 46% of those who have died from physician-assisted suicide have a BA or higher. These are patients who are not only educated, but die the way they want, and it is with dignity. Our plan of action for physician-assisted suicide would go into effect after all other treatment options have been exhausted and the best of hospice care has failed to relieve unbearable suffering. Requests for physician-assisted suicide must be written by the patient who is capable of making and communicating healthcare decisions, or by someone who is not their doctor or has interest in the patient's death and has no entitled portion of the patient's estate. The patient's psychiatric and physical health must be evaluated by a medical expert to ensure that it's not just a person that's suffering from depression who wants to end their life. And after all of these guidelines have been exhausted, the patient must wait 15 days before getting their prescription, and the patient is more than allowed to rescind a request at any time. This policy would go into effect in November of 2017.